at Itsec. So the next big thing, mission that we've been doing, it's actually something we've been doing throughout the entire year, is where we enable government, industry, and academia to posture their organizations to accelerate emerging technologies. This year we focused on 5G and on artificial intelligence, as well as we focus on some of those other technologies. And so today you're going to hear about future visions for various government organizations in the modeling, simulation, and training industry. And so this event is the government CTO and CLO perspectives on future vision. So before we jump into this, we have our sponsors that I'd like to recognize. So our gold sponsor is Black Shark AI and Raphael Advanced Defense Systems. And our gold sponsors are FedLearn, SoarTech, and Unity. Without their support, we couldn't pull off an event like this in this kind of environment for you all to collaborate on emerging technologies. So if you can, please give our sponsors a round of applause. After this event is concluded, I will be in one of the corners, as well as another person, another volunteer supporting, will be giving out the tickets to the social. So the social's in room 303 Charlie C, which is right over there. And so I'll start at 5:30. So please come there, and that's where you will have the opportunity to meet the speakers, talk with them, collaborate with other like-minded individuals such as yourself to figure out how we can embrace and accelerate these technologies. All right. We have a great speakers that we're bringing up here to talk with you all today. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Wendy Welsh. She's the Chief Learning Officer at the Air Education Training Command. We also have Dr. Jeremy Landman, and he's the Chief Technology Officer for the U.S. Army Program Executive Officer, Simulation Training and Instrumentation. We have Lieutenant Chris Gregory. He's the Command Technology Director for the U.S. Navy Reserves. And we have Dr. Jim Farmer, the Chief Scientist, and also Head of Experimental and Applied Human Performance Research and Development at NOC TSD. And finally, we have Dr. David Stargell. He's the Technology Director for the Air Force Agency for Modeling and Simulation. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Wendy Welsh to come up to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. I don't know, is Wink Bennett here? He's probably on the floor. Anybody know Wink Bennett? He's one of the reasons why I'm here. So I want to thank him. I want to thank NTSA. I want to thank the sponsors. And I want to thank all of you for being here. So there's super bright lights on me. So the only people I can see are like in these 2 rows. So if you want to be seen, move in. If you want to not be seen, move out. I'm super excited to be here. I've been the Chief Learning Officer at the Air Education and Training Command only for 2 years. And when you talk to service members, they go, 2 years? You're like an expert. You know everything. But I feel like I'm continually learning. And so when we talk about the next big thing in learning, I'm coming from just knowing a little bit of the Air Force ecosystem, but knowing a fair amount about learning in general. So I want to share some kind of sense-making frameworks with you, and I hope that I see you at the social so we can talk a little bit more, because the time is going to be my enemy. And I told Bob, I said I had about 6 chocolate-covered espresso beans, so I should be at just like 1.5 on how I'm speaking. But let me move just right into it. I love this quote by Peter Senge. I think this is so important, that today's problems come from yesterday's solutions. So today's solutions will maybe be our next problems. So really thinking about how time and how our perspectives change, and how it's really about what's in our own imagination that really creates the reality in front of us. And so think about that for a minute, but not too long, because I want to take you through some ideas. The first thing I want to introduce you to is Gracious Space. And so Gracious Space is from the Center for Ethical Leadership, and that's in upstate Washington. It has 4 basic principles, and I've been thinking about these principles for about 8 years, and I'm still learning how to create the sense of gracious space. So Gracious Space has presence, setting, welcome, and learning. And I'm going to run through these beautiful slides. So I want to tell you about these slides, because I used to have a much more plain kind of Air Force looking slide. And someone from our instructional technology unit at Goodfellow said, "Ma'am, I think I could make this a little bit better for you. And so graciously, I opened myself up to get these extraordinary slides. So presence is being here. Us just being here, taking the time to be with each other. And when we're in our organizations, it's about being in that organization, really owning the role and responsibility that you have, and just how you interact and your impact on the ecosystem. So it really is a feedback loop. I can be present, and if you're present with me, we have a feedback loop, and I give space to you, and I can learn from you. That's the first step in creating this gracious space, is that feedback loop of presence. The next is the setting. Here we are in a setting, and I have these interrogation lights on me, and hopefully you have more comfortable lighting where you're at. We're also in rows, so many of you are seeing the backs of other people. So when you think about the setting, what kind of settings do we have the ability to change? Can we have more circles? Can we be in spaces that have more natural light? What kind of things can we do for the setting, and what kind of impact does the setting have on us? So the setting is about physical space, but it's also about time. I mentioned the time for me is probably going to be, I'm going to be talking really fast to get through everything. So time can also be a part of the setting that we need to think about, and then the formats that we have. The other thing about setting is having liquids so that I don't get too thirsty. Those first two ones really were the easy ones. The last two ones have been the hardest ones for me to really adopt and figure out and share and practice. So this one is welcoming what's different, welcoming the stranger. I feel like I'm a pretty welcoming person, but when someone brings up to me an idea that I don't really agree with right away, there's a little narrative in my head that goes, wrong. I have a book you need to read. There's an article. I think your mind is very small because you're not thinking the way I'm thinking. So I've really worked hard to practice to quiet that part of my reaction and allow myself to hear a different perspective. And I think that's really important, to welcome that strange and different way. When we welcome the strange and different way, we open ourselves up to realize and to see different possibilities. But it takes practice. And I love to say that I'm an expert at it after practicing it for this long, but it's still happening. But I will tell you, I notice it more. And I think that's part of the learning, is just noticing when we're being welcoming and when we're not being welcoming. And then the last one, maybe one of the hardest ones too, and that's learning in public. So I have a lot of ideas that I want to share with you today, and in the social hour, or maybe later, or maybe on social media, you'll write to me about how you think I'm wrong. And maybe you'll be right. And I'll have an opportunity to learn in a public forum, either with the questions that you ask here, or to learn in the social media environment, and to do that with grace. How can we do that? Creating a space to learn in public. So I was sharing this, I'd probably been in the job like 6 months, and I had the opportunity to go and speak to a room full of 06s and the kind of the colonel level, lieutenant colonel level, about learning, and I wanted to share this, but they said, we'd like you to frame everything you do and how it's going to defeat the PRC. I'm going, oh my gosh, I don't know too much about that. And so I went right to Air University, and I went to our Center for Asia Studies, and I asked them, can you help me? I'm going to share. And I said, I like to start with this gracious space, but it probably doesn't have anything to do with how we could defeat our adversary. And they looked at this and they said, well, ma'am, those last two things, welcoming what's different, the stranger, and having the space to learn in public, those are key values of the PRC. This is something that's unique to our culture, that when a leader says, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, that people who are following that leader feel like, oh, you're listening to me, you have humility. That's not, so I'm just presenting that to you as a thought piece to kind of think about. Our cultures are different, and some of these approaches that we learn are really important. It might seem really nice, gracious space. It's not very warfighter-centric, creating grace, but really creating grace is a tactic that can help us. So I wanted to leave you with that. How many of you have heard of motivational self-determination theory? This is DC and Ryan, came out in the mid-'80s. No one. How many has read, oh, one person, of course, Jim. How about Daniel Pink? Anybody read the book Drive? a couple more. So DRIVE was built kind of on this premise of self-determination theory. It has 3 principles. It looks both at what intrinsically motivates you to learn and what extrinsically, what are those outside things that help you to learn. So that's underlining these 3 pillars. The 3 pillars are competency, and you'll see a QR code if you want to get your phone out and take a picture of that. That's the Air Force Competency Modeling Handbook. And I'd love for you to tell me what your thoughts are on that, because I think like a lot of federal agencies and all of our services, we are looking at how we can do force development by having competency models and really defining what the competencies are, what the levels are, and what the measurable behaviors are that we can say, you got the competency, you've grown it. And I want to say this is an agile process. So once you've discerned a measurable behavior for a competency, it could change in the future as the platforms change, as the technology changes. So it's really an agile process. So back to self-determination theory. Competency, it starts there. Do you know what you need to know, and can you do what you need to do to most effectively do the role which you've been hired or assigned to do? That's the competency. So it's kind of hard because some of these might be really intuitive, like, I'm a communicator, foundational competency of communication. But really then thinking about, how do we measure that you're good at communication? And how do I say, well, you're good at communication at a basic level, you're good at an intermediate or an expert level. So really thinking through that in your role and in your environment, how do we measure that? And then that can give you a guide on what you can do, what you need to learn to advance your skills and competency to do your role even better. Maybe even if we're successful on discerning our career paths and identifying where these different trainings can have to build your competency. That would be like the golden road, the golden ticket. So once you have a competency, the next thing you need is some autonomy, some space to do it, to practice it. And so this is really important. In some environments, you might have a competency to do something, then we don't want you to do that. That's not in your lane. We don't have space. I don't necessarily trust you to do that. And there could be a lot of variables that can kind of limit your autonomy to do something. And then last is the belonging, the sense of relatedness, because rarely do we do anything that doesn't have a cascading impact or require someone else to do something to actually get the mission done. So what's that kind of relationship of relatedness? I share this too because I found this to be very useful as a diagnostic. So as we have new technologies, new tools, new approaches to do learning or to do the mission, and they're not working, I'm frustrated. What's happening here? I found that if I look at these 3 buckets, do we have the competency that we need to do the mission? Can we implement this new software? Is this, do we have everything that we need to hold the data for the simulation tool in order to do this? You know, really thinking through, do we have the competency in personnel and systems to do it? Secondly, if that's all good, yeah, we have all of it. We can do all this. We have the resources, we have the space, and we have the people who can do all this. But we don't have the autonomy because our upper leadership doesn't trust this or thinks that the way things are already working are good enough. You know, that might be, it's an autonomy issue. And the third one is the relatedness issue of maybe people are doing things. We have a lot of Air Force instructions. DOD has DOD instructions, and there are guidance of how we do business. There are many times that we might get a waiver to doing that because the way that it says to do it doesn't really work for us. And so we maybe have a practice of getting these waivers and going around and creating different pathways to get the mission done, because that's what we do. We get the mission done. Over time, this can create a separation and relatedness from the people who own the policy and then the operators. And I've seen this in several occasions in several agencies where the relatedness is moving apart. People are doing what they're doing. And you'll hear, how many of you have heard the term valley of death? All right, valley of death, I think, is a relatedness issue where you feel that the system itself is not understanding what you need to do. So when you look at it through that lens, it might give you additional ideas to look at what are pathways for this to actually happen. How can I better understand the person who's approving the ATO or not approving the ATO? How can I help to understand what this requirement is and how this person sees this, and how can we move together collectively? Okay, I'm running out of time. It says I have 4 minutes, so I have 2 more things I want to share with you. How many of you are familiar with OODA loop, John Boyd's OODA loop? Lots of people are trained in this in the military. I wanted to share with you PopDoc. It's a new, I know you like it, huh? PopDoc is an iteration. There's a book called You're It. It's Lenny Marcus and Eric McNulty and a couple of friends. They're at Harvard. They're in the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative. And they've been thinking about John Boyd. All people in emergency management have been thinking about John Boyd's OODA loop and how can we apply all the things that have been learned from the military and apply them to domestic security. But what they found is that there were some things that maybe could be a little richer. And there is a lot of research and a lot of scholarship on the OODA loop too. So some of this isn't just theirs. The idea of observing and kind of understanding your environment, that's the first step in the OODA loop. They like the word perceive, and their justification, and I have seen some literature on OODA loop about this too, is that our perception is a little bit wider than just observing, because you're considering your bias, your specific lens. How I perceive this room from this vantage point may be different than how you perceive this room from your vantage point. And so really understanding that perception, not only our vantage points physically, but what our experience level is, what we understand, gives us a different perception. And understanding that things can be perceived differently can help you have a richer understanding of the complexity of problems that most of us are facing. They also use the word orientate, which is really to look at the environment, the situation in which you're making the decision. Then they add this additional element, predict. So these 3, perceive, orientate, predict, they're your thinking ones. And predict, I'm again surprised that we didn't have it in the OODA loop, but it served its purpose, and I think a lot of people have really been building on this. But prediction is asking us to have some foresight. So before we have just decided and before we jump to the decision, we think, if I make this decision, who is it going to ruffle their feathers? If I make this decision, what's the cascading impact 2 years from now? If I make this decision, kind of thinking through all those COAs and predicting before the decision happens. So making those thoughts to predict. Then decide, which is the same, aligned with Boyd. Act is replaced by operationalize. And I personally love this because I think act is more of an individual decision making. I decide I'm going to do this talk, and so I'm up here doing this talk. If I decided I wanted a team of people to do this talk, I might have to address that in a different way. Different people have different feelings about standing up on a stage. Someone might be terrified to stand up here. And so for them to operationalize being up here with me would require different motivation. Maybe if I said, I'll give you $1,000 if you'll come up here, you're like, oh, okay, that was his motivation. Maybe you would say, $1,000 wouldn't even cut it. I need millions. So really thinking about what is it that operational, or I will do it because I know you and you're my friend. Thinking about what are those motivations that help us operationalize our ideas. I think this is also good, again, when we're implementing new solutions for the next generation of what's next, thinking about what motivates people to operationalize, not just providing an order, giving an instruction, putting it in a task jar. Those are not things that really help operationalize. And finally, I again don't know how we got this far without having communication in there. And so you'll notice this isn't a loop. This is a Mobius. So it's intended to really be moving. And so once you've communicated that, then, and you've done all these things, you're going to perceive things differently. So anyway, I wanted to share that. I thought this is a very interesting idea, and I think it might be of value to you. So at the Air Force, what I've been doing over the last year, actually, I was at NTSA last year, iFest, they hosted it. Then after iFest, I came here, and I kept hearing all about this learning engineering. And Jim is like one of the kind of fathers of learning engineering. He's in the third row here. They were telling me all about this learning engineering. It's 3 basic principles. It's human-centered, interdisciplinary, meaning we all work together. There's a role for everyone in learning engineering, and that it's competency and evidence-based. And I've just been thinking about that a lot. This seems like it could be a great sense-making framework for learning across the Air Force. So it's not necessarily about saying, don't do this anymore, do this differently, but see where you fit in here. think about this and expand upon this kind of notion. So we hosted a couple of focus groups. We went to the American Education Research Association, and we learned from all of the researchers across the community about what's the latest and greatest methodologies for doing evidence-based education. We went to Carnegie Mellon, to Itsec, to the IEEE, and really learned from how they're implementing learning engineering, and then we did this. Can I have the 3 minutes to do the video? Okay, so one of the other things I did is I hosted a couple of symposiums. The first symposium that I did, we invited 70 people across the ecosystem to say, what is the ecosystem? How are we connected, the loose and the weak and strong ties? Then last year we talked about storytelling. Then the next symposium that will happen this coming year, we're going to talk about competency implementation. But I want to quickly share the video about how we've kind of applied learning engineering to these symposiums.
For the next few minutes, you will witness some highlights of a spectacular and decisive operation.
We really wanted to facilitate an environment where the story could be told.
We have to do things differently. We have to imagine new possibilities. And our community is how we can do that. We've identified where we're at in the present, and we want to create this new future. But in order to do that in a meaningful, impactful, and compelling way, we have to work together.
As we're grounded in the present, fully present in the present, we're thinking about what the future might look like. How might we imagine the future? The stories are being pulled together, the beginning, the middle, the end, looking at all the characters, all the interactions. We're looking at that, we're filming it, we're collecting the images, the illustrations, we're going to tell those stories. My hope, my desired outcome is that we are planting seeds here. And these seeds then will be shared across the community, from person to person, from the artifacts that are collected and created here in terms of video and reports, that we will be sharing those across and fostering a greater dialogue, inspiring people to do more of what they've already been doing that's succeeding, and to try new and innovative approaches to learning and discovering how we can build our knowledge, skills, and abilities and competencies. So this video was actually developed or designed and created by an Air Guard member. And so part of our symposium is that interdisciplinary part where we invite the Guard, the Reserve, the civilians, not just the learning professionals from AATC, but also our personnel talent management from AFPC. We invite our scientists from AFRL. We invite our headquarters personnel. We invite the community to really come together and look at these issues. So we looked at the ecosystem I mentioned, human-centered, the learning engineering principle, the interdisciplinary, the information sharing, the competency, the evidence and competency base. We're going to be doing 3 rounds of these symposiums, so it's a 9-year strategic plan for us to really be rooted in a community to understand how we can move forward. This groundedness, this foundation, we believe is going to provide us the opportunity to know each other and to actually implement the latest and greatest technologies to advance learning across the Air Force. So I want you all to imagine a future you want. There's a lot of narratives of what we don't want, and I catch myself many times not welcoming the stranger and thinking about what I don't want rather than what I want. So I want to encourage you to do that. Think about data, collaboration, learning to advance the vision that you see, what you can imagine. The imagination, the creativity, the critical thinking, these are our competitive advantage. The learning is our competitive advantage. It is how we will be unstoppable in the face of any adversary. So I want to thank you. That's all my contact information. I hope that we'll be friends.
That was great. Thank you, Wendy. That was awesome. All right, next up is Dr. Jeremy Landman. He's the CTO of the U.S. Army PEO Strike.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Itsec, for putting this together. I'm really excited to be here with you to talk about what PEO-STRI is doing for the Army in terms of advancing what you probably are hearing from the Army and, of course, the greater DoD with respect to digital transformation, right? So you're hearing that term a lot and how it's being applied across different aspects of multi-domain operations and different capability areas within all the services. And then if you've been hearing from our parent organization, ASALT leadership, Mr. Bang and Honorable Bush, Mr. Bang, who's a Silicon Valley engineer, who's now the deputy AE, is all in on this stuff. So all the PEOs, we all recognize that we're all in this journey together. And I want to share kind of where PEO-STRI is trying to do that with respect to providing the best possible training capabilities for our soldiers in the future. So, this is titled, Let's Get Digital. So, if you're familiar with Army modernization and the start of that, you've seen the synthetic training environment, right? That is the convergence of live, virtual, and constructive training for the Army into one cohesive ecosystem. So no more do you have these stovepipe capabilities that you kind of have to force integrate in the future. If some of you soldiers out there, you're familiar with your miles and you're familiar with your other capabilities that are disparate, not necessarily can connect to other capabilities. The idea of STI is to change all that so you kind of have that almost metaverse paradigm. So in order to enable that modernization aspect, you not only digitally transform the capabilities, but also the business processes and the organizations and the culture and a whole bunch of other things that have to happen both within the government and with our industry base and with respect to science and technology in order to get us there. So, and you're in for a treat here. So on the right here are my top 10 technology focus areas that just got approved by my PEO recently. So I finally get to share them with the greater community. And these are areas that are enablers to our digital transformation for the synthetic training environment ecosystem of the future for Army training, as well as the digital transformation work that we have to do within our business processes in order to apply those. So, you can see there on the left, we hit all the multi-domain operations, the synthetic training, which is think of the future of bringing together the next-gen constructive simulation. If you're familiar with the OneSAF and the WarSim, all of that evolves into cloud-based capabilities. Bringing in the live training and augmenting that and integrating that into the constructive and the virtual sim so that those soldiers that are in a virtual, whether it's a gunnery training capability or a convoy trainer or an aviation platform, they see everything that's going on in the constructive world. They see the live folks out at the CTCs or combat training centers are also seeing that all the different threads that are going on within the exercise, and then maintaining that data and collecting that data and being able to apply analytics. So there's a lot of work going on to transform how the Army does this in the future. And then it doesn't just stop there. It also includes our information operations. That's our persistent cyber training environment, our threat systems. We actually, PEO-STRI does a lot of testing of real-world systems to ensure the capabilities work against our adversaries. And then our instrumentation management. Again, we collect a ton of data. What do we do with that? Today, we don't do a good job of doing anything with it after assessment or after action review. How do we persistently collect, analyze, and derive value from that very expensive data and apply that to future training rotations, apply it to business changes, or even provide it as information to industry to help us build better solutions. So you can see all the different areas of, obviously AI machine learning is a big one. Mr. Bang is a huge AI machine learning, and we've got it. We're applying new strategies and concepts to bring that in, but we're always open to new ideas and to further developing and maturing those strategies. We work very closely with our S&T partners to ensure that we can get after how we can apply it not only to our systems, but also to our business processes and applications internally to make us better efficient government stewards of not only your tax dollar, but also get the capabilities out faster. And you can see the whole host of technology focus areas with human performance and optimization, really customizing the training experience for our soldiers of the future versus a one-size-fits-all training experience. I can't go too far without just giving a shout out to our Team Orlando Alliance, because we, as you can see with all of us here today, you got the Navy, Air Force, we all work together here in the Team Orlando ecosystem, and we work together on all of these different technologies and capabilities. We're all on the Tech Grove board, which many of you have probably seen or heard of, and that's really a cool way to come together and collaborate and work with the industry, especially non-traditional small businesses, to come in and give us what are your good ideas, and it brings in a lot of diverse thinking and options. So we definitely, we really value this ecosystem, and we continue to promote it in order to get the best ideas. And also, there's opportunities for us to share solutions across our different product lines. So, we can cost share, we can work with vendors and joint capabilities and things. So lots of cool stuff there. And it also includes, our academic partners, like University of Central Florida being a big one. And then, as you can see, there's many state and local government and various other agencies that take advantage of that. So Mr. Bain coins, this concept of the Army Digital Odyssey. That's kind of the journey that the Army is trying to go through to transform its kind of archaic and somewhat, well, probably very bureaucratic processes and ways of doing things, right? And it's not easy. So you got the top down pushing it, even at the USD level with Ms. Shu's office at USD R&E. And then, you got kind of got this new generation of people, as we bring in through talent pipelines and things that are interested in new ways of doing things. The middle layer is kind of like, well, we're comfortable because we've been doing some things like this and we've been burned before, because when we try to get creative, you get kind of smacked around. So that's the culture change, not being so risk adverse and then not penalizing the people for taking risk, because in order to modernize and transform, you have to accept risk. And we want to reward that in ways. So that's really the big culture change on that. But the Army senior leadership recognizes it, and they're pushing that down. And now the PEOs, actually in the 20 years I've been working within the ASALT community, this is probably the last couple of years have been very refreshing in terms of the amount of energy and ability to start to, the empowerment of making decisions in order to kind of drive and forward change in order to get the best capabilities. So it's not overnight and it's not necessarily easy, but it's at least we have the opportunity, and it's just, we're pulling people along, and a lot of folks are jumping in and ready to do it. So it's a fun time to be with the Army right now. So you can see all the right is really ASALT's main areas for digital transformation. Modern software practices. You've seen with the new adaptive acquisition framework and the new software acquisition pathway. PEO Stri was actually the first one to get 2 or 3 of those through the process. So we have been all in on that for a while, and synthetic training environment has been the driver for that. Modular open system approach, open architecture, standardization, common components, plug and play, right? You've heard that lots of times. Again, that's it's law, it's regulation, but we're trying to figure out the best way to do that protects intellectual property and data rights, because that's always the big thing there, but also continues to provide capability and the best value for both our soldiers and then ultimately for the taxpayer as well. Digital engineering, another initiative at the ASALT level for not only do you want to transform your capabilities, but what are you doing internally in your business practices in order to enable that. So it's getting away from the old-fashioned sitting around and putting together acquisition strategies and statements of work and specs and seed rules. Yes, you still have to do that, but how do we automate that stuff? I mean, we can probably apply generative AI and come up with a SAL, right? Or at least 90% of it, and then come back and look at it and refine it. Spend the effort on the actual requirements and capabilities and getting the good stuff out there to the soldiers. So, and really that's going out to the soldiers' touch points and actually sitting with the soldiers and doing that human systems integration work that I think really is going to start becoming more the priority, and less sitting in a cubicle writing SALs and specs and then throwing them on on SAM.gov, right? So, and that also includes agile contracting capabilities, and there's lots of things there that have to change as well. And then there's things with respect to data, machine learning, and all kinds of areas that we're looking for. This is the boring slide. This just says, there's policy that says we should do this, starting with the national security strategy all the way through. That's great, but as you know, in order to actually do it, you got to get into the nuts and bolts of what's really important. And what I liked about, this came from Dr. Raj Iyer when he was CIO of the Army, he just laid out 3 major objectives. You can see modernization, readiness, reform, people, and partnerships. And we took that and we kind of used that to help facilitate an industry day about a year and a half ago. And you can see at the bottom the POSRI objectives, interestingly, pretty much line up to that. And that's the objectives of people, processes, organization, culture, and technology. And we use that to drive our digital transformation journey. And that's where you can see left to right, our past challenges of being inefficient, not sharing the right data, suboptimal decision making, all these issues. Oh, that didn't show up very well. I apologize for that. But the idea there is, we have these lines of effort that we are actually contracting out with various vendors. It's not one vendor owns the entire digital transformation ecosystem. We're breaking it up. The PO has stood up a PM shop, project management shop within POSRI to be the horizontal integrator and to look at all of these different changes within the enterprise that have to happen in order to streamline the business operations in order to enable our project managers and their teams to be more efficient and faster at the transforming their capabilities for our training systems and simulations. So everything from implementing large-scale data analytics, reducing our risk, obviously adopting agile acquisition, but also bringing in new capabilities and technologies and skill sets within the organization, both POSRI and our industry base, to help facilitate and make that quicker, because we want to get to it as quickly as possible. In order to do that, it requires what Mr. Bang and ASALT refer to as upskilling the workforce. And we have spent the last 2 years investing a lot of money, both for our current workforce, bringing in new talent through talent pipelines. We're now part of various DoD levels internship programs. We've stood up an acquisition academy apprentice program where we upskill new employees coming into the organization and we start with a digital engineering, digital transformation mindset. We don't just go and talk, the DAU typical DOIA certification process, although they have also been changing to more of a digital mindset. And also, we're investing, Udemy was a big one that ASALT invested for all the Army that required everyone to get trained in digital transformation. We've certified I think we have about 77 certified Scrum Masters today at POSRI, and the goal is to have 100% everybody certified Scrum Master at some point. We've had several folks go through Carnegie Mellon's CDO program on AI and machine learning, so we're trying to get our workforce trained up on the latest AI techniques and become champions in those areas. And then and it's just a handful, but there's a variety of mechanisms that we're deploying, and we're also trying to bring in new and modern tool sets. So we're trying to get, it's not all just going to be Outlook and Excel and PowerPoint. We have obviously our Army 365 environment, but it's also bringing in new industry tools into the environment that kind of starts the creative juices of our team members, so they're not always stuck using kind of the old systems of email and things to track things. So we're bringing in new tools and capabilities to provide for them and also training them up on that. And then I mentioned the new PM shop that was stood up in order to kind of facilitate this enterprise approach for digital transformation. It's going to create what's known as the Unified Integration and Transformation Enterprise Environment. And this is made up of many lines of effort, but the idea is to have that cross-horizontal integration management of all capabilities within the product line portfolio for the PEO. So instead of each project management shop having their own labs, their own DevOps factory, their own configuration management tools, the idea is to have an enterprise level set of tools that they can subscribe to. That saves them time from not having to worry about that. You worry about the soldier touch points, the user use, the human systems integration, the requirement. Let the enterprise provide you everything you need. You don't need to go provision your own cloud services, right? We're going to have that available, and then we're going to help your teams by upskilling them to use those capabilities. So this was brand new within the last 6 months. We've stood up a few, we got a couple of OTAs right now on a couple of aspects of this. We're going to, in 24, spin up a few more lines of effort, and we're just going to continuously and incrementally build this capability over time so that we can meet the digital transformation and digital engineering objectives. So with that, that's the PO Stride Digital Transformation Journey. Appreciate you going on it with me, and I'm happy to answer any questions later about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right, well, we had a great foundation laying by Dr. Walsh and laying down how do we learn and getting us open to thinking about new technologies and adopting those in our organizations. And thank you, Jeremy, for being the first up for presenting the evolution of your technologies to of how you're doing that in the Army. So I think we've got good foundation set to go forward here. So next up is Lieutenant Chris Gregory, the Command Technology Director for Navy Reserves.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. No slides here, just me talking. Here with the Navy Reserve. First thing I want to talk about is unique mission and problems that we have at the Navy Reserve. We have 47,000 selected reservists, just like me. And if the call comes out within 30 days, all of them have to be mobilized and out to the fight, and they have to win. So it's unique problem number one. Unique problem number two, we have to scale. In past wars, we have had incredible amounts of individuals that we've had to scale up and had to provide that fight as well. And problem number three is I get about 10 hours a month of FaceTime with each and every member to get them ready to go. And that's the reality. We have 10 minimum hours per month for a good drill. So that's it. I have 10 hours a month of FaceTime. Technology is what's going to get us where we're reducing administrative burden and we are really defining those warfighting skill sets. So when the fight does come, we're not just going to win, we're going to win decisively. So a little bit about that. Now about me, Command Technology Director. I came into the Pentagon, I took this job, and my predecessor said, hey, you go to 5 meetings a week and you filter good ideas. And I thought, well, I'm here for 2 years, I've got to do a lot better than that if we're going to change things. So I have. And not to trash the term digital transformation, it's a broadly used word. We like to transform, but my office have kind of changed that and we call it disrupting. I try and disrupt the IT and the processes and the hard-baked things that we do, and I want to improve them. I want to break it down. I want to leverage the goodness that we have in industry, and I want to actually disrupt and bring things. Let's see. So I do run roadblocks. I'm in the Pentagon, and when I'm told no, the first thing I say is why. And if it's policy, well, that's easy, actually. I can walk down the hall of the Pentagon, have a cup of coffee with someone and say, hey, is this policy actually applicable, or do we need to change it? But if I'm told no, ask why. The next thing, if something's possible, it's possible. I know these are groundbreaking statements I'm using here, but it's something I do. If something's possible, it's possible. If you tell me no, I'm going to ask you why. And the final thing is failing is not failure. I'm very lucky I have I have a command that's willing to take on risk. We're not risk averse. We're willing to try things and new technologies and give it a shot, and failing is not failure in our eyes. So we have a fantastic IT strategy that we use to kind of accomplish these goals and to empower our 47,000 in their 10 hours a month to be ready to go. First one is maximizing access. What's the point of disrupting and creating these new things if our people can't use it? So our first strategy is maximize access. We've had great success. Number one, we need to provide bandwidth. We have modern Wi-Fi going into all 168 of our sites in every zip code, and we're going to scale it up as much as we need. We're at as many points. We're going to make sure the Wi-Fi is there. And the reason that's important is because we have a 9-to-1 computer ratio. Used to be 13-to-1. I've changed it to 9-to-1. So for every cell res, select a reservist, we have 1 computer for every 9. And again, that goes back to that 10 number. So what happens on drill weekends is people bringing their own device. They have their iPads, and outside drill, their iPads, their computers, their Chromebooks. I want to make sure they can collaborate. I want to make sure they can collaborate safely and securely. Because if we don't provide the environment, they're just going to do it from Gmail. So the next thing we brought on is Nautilus Virtual Desktop. Nautilus Virtual Desktop is no data rest, impact level 5 environment, available to all Navy reservists, and the Navy actually. And there you go. So now I've got the bandwidth, I've got the environment, I'm maximizing access. And then we also have MAMWE. We love acronyms in the Navy, and MAMWE is Mobile Application Management Without Enrollment. Essentially, it's just Teams, Outlook, OneDrive, secure, no data rest on your phone at all times. So that cell res sailor needs to go on training, needs to execute their AT, and their CO is not drilling. They can quickly look at their phone, hit approve, and the orders are routed, and that member can go ahead and start training. Next one is posturing data to inform decision making. Now, when I think of this, I think you get a dashboard, you get a dashboard, you get a dashboard, right? Everything's a dashboard. Dashboard's the big thing. Everyone's got a dashboard, and that's great. And there's a place for dashboards. But here in the Navy Reserve, and the kind of things I'm doing is instead I'm going with 3 steps, and they're all equally hard. Number one, I'm getting the data. That's really tough. A lot of data is siloed off. A lot of data we'll never be able to directly query. We got to get the data. Then we got to vet the data. That's difficult as well. And then, of course, use the data. Thankfully, we do have a Force Data Office in the Navy Reserve, and they're fantastic, working on getting us the data and vetting that data all the time and using it. But we've got to do more, and we are. Touch that, an example on that is I'm trying to bring true ML to the Navy Reserve and predictive analytics for the first time without requiring you to have a degree in computer science. And the way we're doing that is we're finding vendors, and I'm welcome to hear any ideas as well, that provide an environment where they already have a trained model. We've gotten the data, we've vetted the data, now we need to use the data. So we have an environment, we have a GUI, any action officer, any SME who actually knows, say, financial management or training or anything else, they can sit down, they can say, here's the data set I'm going to use, here's the trained model, I'm going to adjust my parameters and hit go. And now the battlefield commander, everyone all the way up to Echelon 1 knows where we're at and what our predictive analytics are. And no more Excel and deciding by cells. I got to get rid of that Excel if I can. And that's a tough fight as well. Our next one is modernize and standardize business processes, automate where feasible. And this is my favorite. I'm huge on automation. I actually have a success story for you. Knowledge Virtual Desktop, NVD. I came on board, and the pilot just started. We're 3 months in the pilot, 60,000 people in an organization, and only 400 had signed up. And I was like, what the heck? Did people just hating this? Or is there something that's blocking this process? So I looked in the process and found out there were about 3 to 8 week lead times, and it's because one person for the enterprise was hand jamming the information in. And not only were they hand jamming the information in, but this was IT savvy information like PIV codes and other things that the normal sailor might not know. So I evaluated and I said, what is the easiest way I can automate and make it so people get on board with this? And I thought, oh, sending an email. And then I looked at it and said, if someone sends me an email, can I use their email address to get me all the data through automation? And the answer is yes. As soon as I unveiled NVD at us.navy.mil, we had a 500% increase in signups. We're nearing 18,000. We're the largest consumer of NVD in the entire Navy. And our lead times went from 3 to 8 weeks down to less than 72 hours. Been a huge success and a starting off point on our automation. Other examples of automation, I was spending 10 to 20 hours a week, 10, 20 hours a week helping people with their IT problems. I said, well, I got to automate this. So I made an app where someone can click a button and check themselves or put in an email, check someone else. It goes through the common 15 to 20 problems I saw, and it gives them automated solutions. So call this number. You need to do this. Submit this form. Now that app is just by word of mouth is being shared, same with NVD, throughout the whole fleet and the enterprise. Navy, big Navy's using it, Navy Reserve, everyone. And it's just a sign of automation. We're also bringing e-signature to the Navy Reserve for the first time. We had a policy in 2003, that's the digital signing policy for the Navy, I believe, and we certainly are doing that. The reality is it's easier to sign a lease in 2023 than it is to route a piece of paper and have it signed in the Navy Reserve, and that's just a fact. Well, I'm changing that, and we are starting a pilot to do real e-signature signing workflows, where it opens up in the browser, you sign with your CAC, common access card, and it moves on the next person, and then it's complete. Also, speaking of leveraging automation, when it comes to getting the data, I'm also leveraging RPA. I've written a number of RPA flows, robotic process automation, and we're leveraging more and more, and we're tasking out more and more, and we're growing it to reach out to siloed off data sources we can never directly query, like Citibank, for example, for GTCC things, and pulling that data into our IL5 flame speed environment, and then using automation, using Power Apps, using Power BI, anything and everything to touch and transact and use that data. Finally, I'm going to talk about focusing the workforce, which is our last big strategy piece. And focusing the workforce, you would think, would be one of the easier ones, but it actually is kind of hard because we have set training pipelines and we have things in place to train our sailors. So where can I come in at the top of the enterprise and really focus on the workforce? And we have 2 main initiatives. The first one is called the I3 Waypoints Challenge. It's a initiative driven by our 3-star, and the idea is that we put a call out to the entire force, say, hey, what's broken and needs to be fixed? What's a process? What's a training that's wrong? What is a requirement that shouldn't be there? What's a failure on our part that we can improve? Then they have a Shark Tank style sit down, and the finalists present their ideas, and then we implement the winning idea. The winning idea this year was RAIN, the Reserve AI Navigator. It's a generative AI product. As my boss likes to say, speed gets a vote, and we'll have the 1.0 version out 31 December of 23. We're not waiting around on it. We're going to industry. We're buying what we need to buy, and we're bringing the technology to our force. So we're going to have the first Gen AI product, I believe, I don't want to say in the Navy, but potentially the Navy, potentially around, and we're rolling it out, and our on-5 environment, and we're doing it. And additionally, all the other ideas in the I3 Waypoints Challenge, at least the finalists and then some, we're moving on, we're putting out the departments, and we're actioning on. We're getting it done. We've reached out, and we're focusing the workforce. The second one is my idea, and I'm running. The term citizen developer. I'm sure we've all heard the term citizen developer, and that's when you have someone in a job or a rate who either has an interest or a tacit knowledge in some sort of development. I guess I'd be considered a citizen developer. My main job is not development, and I'm doing a lot of it. In the Navy Reserve, we have a unique situation where we have senior software developers who come and do their drill weekends as CBs doing construction because they just want something different. But just like me, they felt the pain points, and they wanted to improve things, and they have the tacit knowledge to do so. So how do we capture that citizen development? We talk about them. We know they're out there. How do we capture them? So I'm doing something called the I3 Develothon, where I'm doing a call. Hey, bring me your prototypes. Bring me things you've already written, that your units, that your commands, that your people are using, your automations, your programs, your robotic processes. Bring them to me. The winning idea, or the finalists that we choose, we're going to implement and drive out to the entire enterprise. We're going to take the other ideas. We're going to utilize them. And we hope there's great success. We're getting on. The last thing I'm going to say as I'm running out of time is trust. I found is incredibly important in a role like mine and a role like all of ours, where we are the ones defining and implementing and leveraging technology. And it's so easy to lose that trust, and it's so hard to build it up. So I just wanted to foot stomp that. Maintain that trust is a number one goal of mine when I go around disrupting and automating and doing all these things. And I think it's really important. That's going to be it for me, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. Well, you're making good things happen there in a tough operational environment there, so well done. Okay, next up is Dr. Jim Farmer. He's the chief scientist for NOC TSD.
I think I got one slide, right? Oh. Looks like I've got a little bit of PowerPoint envy going on here. So that looked a lot better when I sent it. So, what? It's on us. No, it's on me. So, for those of you who don't know me, my background is in human factors, human performance, so everything I think about is in terms of human performance and human factors. I work for NOC TSD. I've been there for the better part of 25 years, and so I'm slowly becoming the resident curmudgeon at NOC TSD. So, because when we develop new systems, the first thing I'm asking is, how effective is it, or how do you know it's effective? So that's kind of the theme of my talk here. I'll give you a little story about, I went to a curriculum review a couple of years ago, and it was a Navy organization that was training people to be instructional system designers and to evaluate instructional systems. And one of the professors stood up and said, well, you know what I teach my students is I teach my students to be Itsec proof. And I went, wow, I'm a subcommittee member, and I've been involved with Itsec for about 1,000 years, so I was pretty offended at the time. And then I got to thinking about what he was actually saying. What he was actually saying is, how many of you have walked through the exhibit hall and seen a lot of shiny bells and whistles there? A lot. How do we know they're effective? So that's kind of the mantra we try to live by. NOC TSD's got about 1,200 people who do everything from early on R&D to development of training systems to sustainment to actually disposal at the end of the process. I live in the world of human performance R&D, where training effectiveness is a very important thing, and we want to be able to measure that. biggest way we can measure it is to do some real live R&D and really look at the human performance side of things and do training effectiveness evaluations on the back end. So we know that the systems we're sending out to the fleet are the systems that they can use and that are actually effectively training them. Excuse me. I'm not used to microphones at all, by the way. So we really need to focus on R&D and training effectiveness evaluation. There's been a real effort over the last several years to kind of reduce the amount of time we spend on systems engineering and on the acquisition process, which is all good as long as we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So to me, there's a reason we put systems engineering in place, and there's a reason we have the acquisition process. The reason we put systems engineering in place in the first place was so that we were able to develop cost-effective systems, and we could do cost, schedule, performance trades, figure out what the best system was that we put out. My job has always been to try and integrate the human being into that process. So, you know, we do cost, schedule, performance trades with hardware and software, but we rarely bring the human in till the very end of the process. So I've spent a lot of years trying to do human system integration and get stuff integrated into the systems engineering process. If I do that again, let me know. All right. But we need to figure out how to do it quickly. And that's where things like automation, AI, and all of those things come into place. We can use generative AI to be able to support our development of specs and RFPs and everything else along the way, and that will truly help us. We have an ISD process, instructional system design process, that takes a really long time, but it's important. We need to be able to do task analysis. We need to be able to do those kind of activities to get to an end product that we know, or are at least somewhat sure that when it gets out to the fleet, it's actually going to be usable. It's going to actually be an effective training tool. So, and those are the kind of things we can support with better process, generative AI. Those kind of things can reduce that process. The acquisition pathways and things like that. We need the flexibility, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater in the process. So we need to be able to do it quickly. Required reading for everybody in this room. Lizanne Bainbridge put out a article about back in 1983. It was called The Ironies of Automation. So we need to be careful about how we automate systems. And I may be preaching to the choir here, but what she learned in 1983 was that even though we were automating things to reduce the workload of our operators and our maintainers and everything else, what we ended up doing was just changing the nature of that workload. So they had more workload, and it was just a different kind of workload. So Barry Strock wrote an article in 2017. Please read it. It's a great article. And it's called Ironies of Automation Still Unresolved After All These Years. So despite the fact that we think we actually made some progress in that area, he points out that there's a lot of things we still haven't made a lot of progress on. We're still designing systems that are high workload. We're still designing systems that rely on the human operator at just the time when the system fails, the human operator has to step in. And that's just the time when the human operator probably has the highest level of workload and can't do the kind of things he needs to do. So what we need to really focus on is two things. One is to better design our systems so that we have things like transparency in the process. So when your automated system puts out a course of action, the operator actually understands why that course of action was given, and they're not confused by the fact. When it starts to fail, they should already have the situational awareness that goes along with that. We have to worry about skill decay. If I automate everything, then when the time comes and somebody does need to work on it, they better be skilled, because that's the time when they really need the skill. So how do we integrate that into the design process? Automation surprises are a big thing. Were a big thing back in the 1980s. We've done lots of research in that area. That's another thing that Barry Strock points out, that we still haven't resolved. So, where do we need to focus our training dollars? Well, we really need to focus our training dollars on effectively training human autonomy interaction skills. So, you know, we're asking our warfighters to work with higher and higher levels of automation every day. And in the process, we're asking them to be able to figure out, how should I trust that automation? When should I trust that automation? So I hear all the time, I hear people talking about maximizing the trust in a system. It's not about maximizing the trust in the system. It's about calibrating your trust to the system. If I've got a system that gives me 99% of the time gives me the wrong answer, then, you know, I better be only believing it 1% of the time. If it's 99% accurate, then I can have a lot of confidence in it. But we need to train people to be able to figure out, where do I calibrate that trust? And we need to be able to design those systems so that that calibration of trust is thought through. And we need to figure out ways, wow, I need water. And we need to figure out ways to mitigate the workload. Thank you. Appreciate it, thanks. I meant to bring this up. So calibration of trust is an important thing. Figuring out ways that we can train people to maintain SA on their systems goes hand in hand with how we design those systems as well. So it's both sides of the equation we need to think about. I know this probably doesn't sound like your average NavAir knock TSD pitch, but this is the things that I'm thinking about, and I think our R&D folks are thinking about in the future, is how do we make those systems work for the warfighter? And some of the things that we're not very good at is the connection between our instructional system designers and our research and developers. So we talk when we can talk, but how many of you are familiar with Mill Handbook 29612? Okay, that's kind of the instructional system design Bible that all DoD uses, right? That was actually published in 2001. Think about how many changes in technology and in the systems we have happened since 2001. So we don't think too much about augmented reality, virtual reality, AI, all of those things, because they weren't really existent much in 2001, and they certainly weren't the systems we have today. So we need to be able to figure out a quick way to be able to update our systems so that, update our guidance to instructional system designers so that they are utilizing the latest technology to its best performance. Finally, we need more effective feedback loops. We send stuff out to the fleet. I hope it works. If it doesn't, I usually get a thumbs up, a thumbs down. And really all we ever ask them is, how did you like it? We need performance-based feedback loops that say, how well did it work? Are you sufficiently trained? Have you been sufficiently trained? How can you show me in performance? And how do I feed that back to our folks who are developing those systems to make sure that when they do get those, that we can maintain a feedback loop in the process. Does that make sense? I'm a little short on time, so, or actually I got more time than I know what to do with. So I guess I will just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, so I see a trend coming here, a common theme of the human-centered design approach here to technology introduction into the organization. So thank you, Jim, for that perspective. Okay, next up is Dr. David Stargell, the Chief Technology Director for AFMS.
All right, now for something a little different. This is the audience participation portion of the show. So it's been a long time. Everybody stand up, shake it out. Let's get refreshed here before we get started. All right, so I'm a big fan of Jeopardy. We're gonna start off with a couple Jeopardy questions here. All right, an Air Force leader recently started a speech with these 3 words that covered great power competition, pacing threat, and 2027. Anybody know the answer? Bonus points if you know who the person who said it. Somebody said who said it. What did he say? But what are the 3 words he said when he started his speech? What is China, China, China? All right. Second question. If we are unable to meet this great power competition, if we're unable to match this pacing threat by 2027, this phrase, translated loosely, might be more commonplace across our region. Wo bui shou jing wen. Any thoughts? Anybody? I know what you're thinking. I don't speak Chinese. And that's right. That's what it translates to. I don't speak Chinese. All right, well, let's unpack some of those terms. Great power competition and pacing threat. I'm going to focus on competition and pacing. All right, I'm a track guy. I competed in track in college. My son competes in track in college, so proud dad moment there. And I just love the sport. All right, so when I think competition, that's us trying to win, right? And when I think pacing, when I hear pacing, that is like a pacer that's out in front of the pack trying to push the crowd to a faster time. So China is trying to win this great power competition, and they are pushing the pace. They are driving things at a faster pace than any of us are ready for. So we have to be ready for that. Secondly, when we bring this back to the next big thing, that's the focus of our talk today, next big thing. We could talk on and on about all the different technologies, generative AI, quantum computing, neuromorphic computing, anything related to the biosciences. But the thing is, all of our competitors will have those same technologies. We've seen it in sports. Several years ago, the swimming companies came out with those new swimsuits that kind of mimic shark skin. The swimmers that had them, they won a lot. They broke a lot of records. But over the next year, everybody in the field had those same suits, right? Equal playing field. So we have to assume that our peer competitor has those same technologies. And what if they came up with the shark skin before we did? So their technology might be better than ours. And I said might, because we have a great power nation here that's getting after these technology areas. But there is one thing I know that's different between us and our peer competitor. They have less moral restrictions, they have less ethical restrictions, and they have less financial constraints on their technology areas. So what's that mean for us? It means we're fighting this fight with one arm tied behind our back, right? We're a step behind. I can't even name the current heavyweight world champion of the world right now in boxing. But I do know for sure that he could beat me literally with one hand tied behind his back. Now, I know what you're thinking. David, no way you would even be in a heavyweight class. And I thank you for that. I'm trying to lose some weight. I appreciate that. But I would lose, right? Why? Because he's more trained than me. He's more skilled than me. He's been in more combative sporting situations, so he's more adaptable than me. Even if I had this bio-enhanced glove or this bio-enhanced arm that helped me punch 3 times above my weight class, I would lose. All right, it's not a competition because that's what he does. All right, so what does that mean for us? If we're in this fight with one arm tied behind our back, getting back to the big thing, what I think the next big thing is, and it's not a technology, it's not a new thing, it's making sure that we have the best trained, most skilled, most adaptable fighting forces in the world. How do we get there? Let's go back to one of the terms, great power. Where are my Marvel fans in the room? With great power comes? All right. It is the responsibility of all of us that are here at this conference to help us beat that threat. All right? We're the team that has to bring that to bear. There's no I in team. There's two I's in Itsec. Inner service and industry. Our Army, Air Force, Space Force, Marines, Navy, hand in hand with industry, making sure that we have the best technology, the best tactics, the TTPs, the best training, so that if this conflict happens, our airmen, our soldiers, our Marines, our Guardians, our sailors will go into it knowing that they are the best trained, the best skilled, and most adaptable fighting force in the world. And that's where we have to get to. That is our job. So we have to create the future and train our warfighters in ways we've never done before, hand in hand, so that we can make sure that we aren't in that situation. And why? Why is that important? So that I don't have to learn to speak Chinese unless I want to. She. Thank you.
That was a great perspective there, David, of bringing it home with what our great responsibility is of all of us here in this community to go forward. So what I'd like to do is ask all the speakers to come up to the stage and if we can activate all their mics. And the audience start thinking about what your question is that you want to ask. Richard, can we get a hand with the microphones, please?
Come on, come stand with me.
Okay, while the audience is thinking of a question, I'll have one that I'll launch out here for whoever wants to take it on. So from your respective organizations, what would be perhaps one of your top challenges that you see perhaps where there's a technology need or where you think the community here is just on the verge, but we're not quite there yet, but with a little bit of extra emphasis, if we as a community were to take on that extra emphasis on the technology or whatever it may be to solve your tough challenge for you, what would that challenge and potential technology area be?
Here, I'll jump in. I'll say MLDL. We need it. We've got to get away from Excel and summing by cells. We've got to do real predictive analytics, and we have to find a way to do it without hiring and having to train a cadre of computer scientists and data scientists. I know that's a prerequisite need, right? But we really have to have that knowledge available and that capability in our action officers in the force.
I'd like to build on that because I think we have a lot of those airmen or warfighters within our service already, but they may be aligned in different career fields. So we're working hard to implement the Department of the Air Force Learning Record. So if you have machine learning, coding, any kind of background, but maybe you are working as a mechanic or you're working in a different field and you're doing this on the side, that we can leverage that. We can give space and pipelines. So I think a big part of it is creating systems, accessibility, and access to opportunities to do these sorts of things. And I know we've worked with MIT. We've sent people to be Phantom Fellows at the MIT AI Accelerator. And I think more of those sorts of opportunities. But then it seems like not all of our airmen know about these opportunities. So a lot of it is information flow, too, I think is a big challenge.
I think from my standpoint, I think the challenge is we hear an awful lot about speed to the fleet and getting things out to the warfighter quickly, which is very important, but if we're getting not the best quality products out to them quickly, we're not doing them any favors. So figuring out what's that balance to make sure they get it quickly and they get something effective in the process, especially to our remote and deployed forces that sit out there every day on the pointy end, and we need to be able to be able to quickly deliver to them so that they don't decay in skill and everything else.
Yeah, similarly for the Army, I mean, same thing, we got to get capabilities out to soldiers faster. What I'm finding is it's not necessarily technology challenges, it's how do you bring the technologies into the military and government ecosystem, the networks and everything. So it's going back to the policies and things of cybersecurity, and how do we get the right balance of securing these capabilities, but also being able to be very flexible, adaptable, and quick to bring in the new technologies quickly. It's things like AI and ML. So we don't get shut down immediately because of a vulnerability. We got to quickly assess it, fix it, and then keep using it. So that's a driver in both. That's a bureaucracy, policy. We really need industry to help us solve that, and that's a greater problem that we all deal with.
And I definitely agree with everything they said about getting into the warfighter's hand faster. Specifically for the Air Force, some of the things that we're talking about, are concurrency, fidelity, and interoperability. The fidelity of our simulations needs to be better. We need to have better EW and electromagnetic spectrum representation within those systems so that our warfighters are training to the actual threat and are realistic to what they will see in battle. Similarly, some of the stuff that we're doing today in generative AI for scenario generation, generative AI for ad air. You guys have seen like the DARPA Alpha dogfight and stuff like that. We have to start ingesting some of that into our simulations as well so that we can kind of have a dial for our training systems to let them train against, Top Gun type level of adversaries so that, you want to train harder in the training system than when you actually get onto the field, right? So the field seems easy, and it's kind of backward with some of the negative training that we're experiencing in some of our simulators, so I think that's another big challenge for us.
Do I get two answers?
Sure.
Good. So the other thing I think is, go to the point of training like we fight and being able to do large-scale distributed mission training, we want to make sure that if we're going to do those huge exercises, those very expensive exercises, that there's training value at the individual team and team of teams level. And, that's a challenge that things like data analytics, data science, AI, that's the only way we're going to solve that big problem.
I think two other things I want to add. One, the bureaucracy. I think that as leaders, we need to own the bureaucracy. It wasn't as if an alien spacecraft came down and wrote all this doctrine and policy. It was human beings, and we're in leadership positions, and I think that we need to own that, and we need to really roll up our sleeves and figure out where are those pain points and correct it. No one is going to correct it for us, and doing waivers and workarounds and pushing people to be uber creative in acquisition, it's not good. We need to look at that. We're no longer linear hierarchical. I mean, there are those systems, but really we're more net-centric, and our policies need to reflect that. And to your point about the fidelity of our sims, I've been really impressed with some of the fidelity, not necessarily, well, definitely the flight, but also in some of the other career fields that we have where we're utilizing AI to help us build simulations to train our chaplains and our leaders and how to navigate those tough conversations that you have when an airman's impacted by a mental health issue or a stressor. How can we utilize artificial intelligence to help us kind of build out those realistic scenarios too? And we're doing that. To that point, I think we need to share that across the joint services so we're learning together. This morning, General Robinson convened, and it was just the biggest critique was it was too short. All the services came together and we shared, how are we doing that learning continuum from the time that a Marine, an airman, a soldier comes into the service? How are we helping them to think in these creative ways, navigate bureaucracies, find the opportunities? And there's some amazing things happening that we are like, whoa. So I think more of that at all levels, not just senior leaders, but also we're connecting on LinkedIn, we're connecting on all these places, and really doing that across the services, I think will help lift us up.
Piggybacking on both of those, the training like we fight,
and the joint services, we know that when we go to the fight, we're not going to go alone, right? So, but right now, we are limited in how we train together, primarily due to multiple levels, security classifications. So being able to do MLS, zero trust, all of those things so that we can train collaboratively with our joint and coalition partners is going to be key, because that's how we're going to go to the fight.
Awesome. Those great answers. We got a question from the audience.
Yeah, Chris Norland. I'm with Army DevCom, prior Navy. Worked at, was a distributed simulation person inside the Navy. Have worked M&S as well in a joint agency domain. Now working for Army. Leveraging the conversation that just occurred, I've seen the problems associated with inter-service joint training 20 years ago. Same problems exist today. What would you say to us as an audience? How should we, as industry capability developers in services, actually solve the problem so that we can do the things that you're talking about? Because we know we are going to go to the fight together. So how do we train every soldier, every guardian, every airman out there from the ground up that it is a joint battle? Over.
Well, I'll jump in real quick. I'll say that we're definitely going to go to the battle together, but I think you're correct, and I think there is, I don't see it in the near future of true joint collaboration when it comes to training and preparing for the fight. We have our own pots of money. We execute, we exercise the discretionary funding different in every MILDET, and that's just kind of the nature of the beast. I would say for industry, though, is keep your eye out for disruptors. Sounds like we're really a lot of that to cut through red tape and to change things. Keep your eye out for that, and be willing to fill that need, and be willing to flex a little bit. The Navy, for example, all the MILDETs have their own version of 365. We call it flank speed in the Navy. I don't know if the Air Force calls it Cloud One, or they call it Cloud One, right? So there's a quick example there. We're doing the same thing. We're spending our money a little differently, and we're naming it differently. But at the end of the day, it's sort of the same thing. And even the joint ops is their own kind of animal as well, by the way, which is interesting as well. But I guess the point is, from industry perspective, as someone who, I'm prior Air Force, prior enlisted Air Force, woo, air power, and now I'm a Navy officer. I didn't think I'd be here. And then working in the Pentagon, I will tell you that we all want the same thing. We're all doing it a little differently because we have to execute our money differently. We all have our own priorities. And I'd say industry is just be willing to flex and be willing to say, hey, you know what? Here's something to do with the Air Force. Is it applicable here in the Navy? And don't worry, we'll change the name if you want.
Yeah, I'll just say that going back to my TV references, right? $6 million man, we can rebuild him. We have the technology to do the things that we're talking about doing. We need policy changes to allow us to do that from the security standpoint. So I think for us to influence that, we have to have that single voice and that continuing voice to those senior leaders that somebody talked about, the policies and why and no and show me where. Those are the type of things that we have to challenge so that we can get beyond that going forward.
I think too, it needs to be evidence-based. So a single voice is great, having that, we're not conflicting with each other, but I think if you have evidence-based, we're engaged in joint experimentation, showing the effectiveness of what we're doing. And I think with industry, that's really important. We go out onto the floor. You had said the Itsec proof. I think we're going out onto the floor and we're seeing a lot of things that hold a lot of promise, but knowing what the interoperability is, asking the right questions, identifying what we need to test and how we need to build on that test so that we have a strong evidence-based argument that has good data behind it. That's a compelling argument. Just coming in and saying, well, I used to work for the service. I know your problems and I think this is going to work. And that isn't going to do it. I think that we've wasted money in kind of that experimentation. It's great to do these early SIBR things, but as we move up those SIBR letters, we need to have good experimentation and good data behind those decisions that we make. And I think sometimes we aren't, maybe we're a little bit less than where we need to be in that area.
So if Diana Teal was here, she'd probably clap. But I'm going to give a shout out to Team Orlando, because I do think that that the infrastructure and the ecosystem we have here in Orlando, that includes NARTSD, the other services, all of industry and everything else, is very helpful, because then we can cross-pollinate.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't have the same funding lines and the same way of going about it, but at least things like Itsec and things like that really help us to be able to cross-pollinate and pass information that we need to do, those kind of interoperable things.
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, at the end of the, I mean, the modeling simulation community has been very good at establishing standards over many decades, right? We've had HLA and DIS and owning, and I think that has to continue. And I think it actually has to almost get more priority in terms of, as we now go into this more agile, transformative approach of building new capabilities quicker with all these great things, industry, in terms of, if you want to help us build the architectures for these things, because the government, I can't say the government's going to own it, but not one vendor is ever going to own it either. It's going to be a community-owned architecture, right? And that's what, you know, at least in the Army side, and I'm sure the other services, in order to work in a joint environment, we have to have that common architecture that we all can talk and interoperate through.
Awesome. I think we've got a question over here.
Excuse me.
The conversation that we've heard this week so far has talked about the need for having the infrastructure, the foundation, in order to bring all of this to the schoolhouses, to the operation centers and things like that. And right now at the tactical level, we're not really seeing that. So I'm just wondering how much emphasis is also being put on making sure, Commander, I know you spoke to it a little bit, you said that you're getting your centers out there. How much of a pain has that been, and how long is that taking you? Is it excruciating, or is it actually going quicker than you thought it would be?
We're getting it done. I think that, if I hit a roadblock, I say why.
Right.
No and why, and I want to walk down. I will say, too, it's kind of interesting, and East Department, too, is, right, you might go to the schoolhouse. So the schoolhouse that we fund and we have and they reserve, they operate in their own budget and they do their own thing as well, right? They ask for a little bit of permission, but they're driving the car. So I would say for industry, you've got to engage, you know, just find that point and engage with them, and that's where it's really going to happen. We can say, hey, you will do this, but a lot of times it's not going to happen, and that does come down to leadership. But I wish I had a better answer for you, other than, like, if I'm told no, I'll say why, and we're not afraid to take risks. Yeah.
From the Air Force
I guess.
From the Air Force perspective, I think part of that is building a community of practice at different levels too, so that you're sharing that information. And so creating a foundation, Dana Horn's in the audience here, and she's established a community of practice for learning professionals that spans all of the career fields. Everybody's welcome, including Space Force, into that environment. So as people are building things, there's a space for that information sharing. Is it perfect yet? Does everybody know about it yet? No, but we're moving in that direction and we're creating those spaces. And I think when you create that space, just like the joint meeting General Robinson hosted today, you start to understand more of what that ecosystem looks like.
Yes, ma'am, but also you have to be able to get to it. That's what I'm saying. The wide bandwidth, low latency is just not there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's those basics that really, it may be at the tip of the spear where you're doing the warfighting training and things like that, or we're talking about guys fresh out of base, gals fresh out of basic training, who come in, they got 3 days to in-process, then instantly they have to start into their technical training. It can be difficult, and there's a lot of cognitive overload because they're also trying to get the human performance training and all those other things. I hope that those conversations are also being had as far as maybe extending the time between the time they get out of basic training and they initially start their technical training, so that they can gain the benefits of that human performance training as they move through technical training.
Yeah.
Okay. And as someone who, hey, I went to that training. I was in the Air Force, went to basic training, and immediately went to tech school. I was in tech school for 6 months, and then immediately went to Korea as my first duty station. And I will tell you, there is that form of knowledge you're hitting on. That's important. But I think the tacit knowledge is where the real capabilities lie. And unfortunately, there's one way to get tacit knowledge, and it's to do. And I'm a big proponent of, you know what? Let's get you. Actually, in fact, I have an IT1 who works for me, an information technician, first class, E6. He is fantastic, and the reason he's fantastic and he is hardworking is his first floor out of A school was a ship. And he went to a ship, and he did the hard job, and he cut his teeth earning and building that tacit knowledge. He came to us at the Pentagon, and he is just literally a wonderkind. So to touch on that, I agree, and we can rewrite syllabuses and all this stuff. I went to a course for my designator, IP basic, and there was some useful stuff, but for 5 months I sat there and I kind of just learned a hexadecimal as I already knew that thing, right? But doing the job and being a department head and having this tour and doing that things, that tacit knowledge is, is invaluable. So I would say that we are doing the tacit knowledge piece. The thing is that I think we need to make the right calls as leaders and say, you know what, you're not going to go to this easier job your first time out. In fact, I think you need to be challenged and you need to not sink or swim. You need to have the guidance and you have the leadership there to kind of mentor you. But we've got to build that tacit knowledge because when we go to the fight, it's not a matter of win or lose. It's win and decisively win.
Got another question? Oh, yep.
Joshua Byrne, learning scientist. Also, I work with EB, one of the program reps for Columbia Development, submariner. Big question, and I'll add a little feedback to it. I've heard a lot about AI as I've been here, a lot of automation, data. One thing you mentioned was skill decay. I'm going to say, how would you approach that? And the reason I say approach is because I do understand, as even from my own, messing with ChatGPT, Bard, and various other things, that I do see in myself some decay, but also, is it really worth the decay? Is that decay a bad thing? And then, but also I've seen it in some cases where, as a submariner, sometimes we lose fundamental things in that decay as we start automating certain ranges and things like that looking for it. So I just want to know, how do you approach that?
I guess that's mine. I think there's a lot of ways that you can approach that. One is to give multiple training opportunities along the way to refresh your skill level. So, we're getting better and better at putting training systems out there to the remote and deployed folks and having them be able to use them in their spare time. We also just need to be able to design our pipelines and everything else so that people get that refresher training as part of their pipeline at the end. And look for ways when we develop our automated systems to make sure that we have some embedded training into those automated systems as well. I know DHS does stuff for TSA when they're doing inspections and things like that, where they get training as they're going through the process of looking at your luggage. So sometimes things pop up that they weren't expecting.
Yeah, I think that just-in-time training is part of it, but competency modeling, if you are really, you're instilling autonomy and you realize that it's going to replace some skills that may be needed if that's no longer available. And I think disaster response, DHS is a perfect mission for that, because when disasters occur, a lot of the infrastructure that you might have relied on, the technology, is no longer there. So how do you make sure that people can still do those skills? So competency modeling, identifying what are the competencies to do that role, what are the observable behaviors that need to be done, how can we do them in a technology-rich environment, and how do we do that in an austere environment? And then giving that ownership to the warfighter themselves to be responsible for that competency. And so that's what we're looking to create, this learning continuum that's easily visible for a warfighter to see, that when I go through basic, I'm developing these skills, and I'm going into a specific career path, I'm developing these skills. I know how I can do this in a rich environment and an austere environment, but we're really giving that, instead of serving it on a platter in this culture that I'm going to give you what you need, that you know where to find it. I mean, like, listening to you is so inspiring because you're hungry, you're a disruptor, you're going to make things happen. And I think that's really kind of the appetite that I see in a lot of our airmen. They're hungry. It's the systems that are kicking their butts because they're like, I can't get to it. So I think that's what our job is to create that system that makes it accessible. It's going to take time. It's going to take consistent vision, working together, and sticking to it. It's not an easy thing to do.
So I'm going to answer twice again, just for fun. I also, in my talk, I was also talking about the need for a feedback loop, for a training effectiveness evaluation feedback loop. Yeah. We don't know whether or not people's skill are decaying or not if all we're getting is, yeah, I liked it, or yeah, I didn't. So, or no, I didn't. So we really, really need to have performance-based feedback loops that go back to us to say, oh, here's where the skill's decaying, here's where I might be able to resolve that problem. Exactly.
Yeah, I kind of equate that to, my son just got his license recently, and we're driving in, my wife's new car, and of course, all the sensors are there, and you don't have to worry about looking in your, your blind spot, or you're backing up. You got a camera, and they're not doing that now. So if all that stuff doesn't work on your car, can they even drive? So it's like, okay, yeah. So it's almost, we got to get away from that idea of procedural learning and more, critical thinking skills. It's really, you got to be able to adapt to when things happen and change, and then somehow exercise that thought process. So, in our curriculums and in our teaching and learning paradigms, how are we fostering that critical thinking aspect? Because that's, at the end of the day, you got to apply some of your fundamentals there in a way that makes sense.
All right, we have time for one
more
last question, and
Sorry.
and we'll try to do it with a rapid-fire response because I want to be respectful of those that might have to go.
Sorry about that. One more question from Electric Boat. So I'm with General Dynamics Electric Boat. So one issue that I see that it's a huge metric, and I wonder about whether we're going to have to be asked to learn Chinese in 2031, or maybe even sooner than that, is the fact that in China, STEM starts in grades 3 and 4, and it starts as a requirement, not an option. In the United States, STEM is typically an after-school program. How are we going to beat China if every 10-year-old 10 years from now can invent better simulations than we see on the floor back there? Better AI, better ML, because they're coming out of high school with those capabilities.
We won't. No, we have to reinvigorate STEM education across the U.S., right? So that's a big portion of all of the services, right? K through 12 education. If you go out to the booth, there's a whole education group in the back corner, the First Robotics Leagues. Those are the things that we have to continue to advocate for and to continue to push, because if it's not going to be in the mainstream curriculum, we still have to provide that capability to the kids that want it and can thrive in it, right? So we have to be the mentors, we have to be the advocates, we have to be in the school system showing them what the art of the possible is for their careers, so that they continue to follow those paths. But yeah, that's the future for us.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and not only the STEM aspect, but what I'm realizing as I'm hiring the next generation of folks, it's really hard to recruit today's youth into wanting to be in the military, government, and this kind of workforce, doing this kind of work where they think we're at wars and we're killing people. We've got to figure out a way, how do we approach these generations and future generations and get them accepting of doing this work as part of, serving your country and defending the nation and things, and not thinking about it from that perspective. So that, I think, is going to be a bigger challenge even than the STEM thing, because they're all going to STEM, but they're going to Microsoft and Google, and they're building cool video games and stuff, but they don't want to work and create weapon systems and cyber attack systems and things. So that's, I think, a huge challenge.
And they don't want to work in dysfunctional bureaucracies that don't care who they are. And I think that's the bigger issue maybe for the recruiting. By deterring, we actually win. So I think there's another message too about recruiting. But I guess my thing would be, we might not ever catch up because we have a different sort of culture enforcing. We have a different sort of K through 12 regulation that need to be changed with legislation. Only the privileged are going to other schools that allow them to do a little bit more, and then we're trying to inject it where we can. But our competitive advantage is creativity, imagination, critical thinking. Those are things that if we did a comparable of what U.S. schools are doing and what our children are up to comparatively, we might see a different spectrum of this and that. And so I think we want to look at that capability and that competitive advantage that we have as well, and put information and emphasis into that, and also be recruiting those type of people, because the teams that are really diverse are the teams that are really winning. And so the one side focus on just STEM may be a vulnerability in the future that we might not have. Look at lessons learned from Ukraine and the NCO Corps and some of the things that are happening there. The leadership, the creativity, the autonomy, the doing what needs to be done and being clear on mission is really a competitive advantage.
So I had a professor way back 100 years ago in grad school, who used to talk about the caveman in the cockpit. And the point was that we learned the same way we did eons ago. And so we need to be very careful not to just assume because everybody's got one of these in their hand and that's the way they communicate, that they're somehow need training solutions that are high-tech or fit into their mold of learning. In some respects, they learn the same way we did and the same way people did in the past. So we just need to figure out what that right balance is. And I'll keep beating the drum on we need to collect human performance measures to make sure we understand what they learned and what they didn't.
The data.
Exactly.
I guess I'll go really fast. I think the one thing we have that China doesn't have is diversity. We've got incredible people in this country, incredible people that come to this country every day and add to it. And they might speak English from grade 10, but we can speak Farsi, Hebrew, any other dialect in this country, and we have an incredible wealth of creativity and diversity in this nation that we can capitalize on. So
Awesome.
I made it quick.
Okay, I can tell from some of the body language in the audience that there's some more questions, and so that's why we have a social at the end of this, to meet the speakers and talk with them. So invite you all at 5:30 to go to 303C, and we have a social there. Grab a ticket from our volunteers that are here and myself. And since in the spirit of this being the future vision, there's one more prediction that I think we all can make for a couple weekends from now, and we know that Army's just going to beat the hell out of Navy. So.
How dare you?
Thank you all.
We're the
I have no
neutral.
dog in that fight.